The salty air of the docks was once home to Captain Edgar Eddy Gullsworth. He was a simple fisherman. He loved the sea. He loved his pipe. He loved his boat, the salty siren. Eddy wasn't known for catching much. He was more of a enjoy the ride kind of fisherman. But one day that all changed. He pulled in the catch of a lifetime. A giant tuna, shimmering silver and blue, lay upon his deck. Eddy danced a jig. He kissed the fish. He named it Susan. He had finally done it. He was a real fisherman now. Little did Eddy know his moment of triumph was about to be swallowed whole. His victory was about to be snatched away. And his mind was about to be lost at sea. Eddy went below deck to grab his celebratory sardines and crackers. He could practically taste the fame. He'd be the toast of the docks. Mayor McTavish would finally acknowledge his existence. But when he emerged, a horrifying sight met his eyes. A massive seagull with beady eyes and feathers the color of a storm cloud was perched upon his tuna. Susan, it looked at Eddy, a sardine dangling from its beak. Eddy's sardine. It let out a mocking squawk and soared away, a chunk of Susan's glistening side meat in tow. Eddy screamed. He shook his fist at the sky. He vowed revenge. This was no ordinary seagull. This was a monster in feathered clothing. This was the enemy. That night, Eddy didn't sleep. He saw seagulls everywhere. Their beady eyes peered at him from the shadows. Their mocking laughter echoed in the howling wind. And their noses, those long, hooked noses, they were everywhere. The baker, Mr. Henderson, suddenly had a beak instead of a nose. Mrs. Fitzwilliam, the librarian, was sporting a feathery white crest. The line between man and bird was blurring in Eddy's mind. The seagull that stole Susan wasn't just a bird. It was a symbol. It was all people with big noses coming to take what was his. His blood began to boil. He had to do something. He had to protect the world from this feathery menace. He had to stop them. He had to become the Gull Guillotine. Eddy decided he needed a weapon, but not just any weapon. He needed something fitting, something poetic. He needed a fishing rod. He took his most prized rod, Old Trusty, and modified it. He replaced the hook with a large, rusty meat hook. He practiced casting it, his eyes narrowed, muttering to himself about beakies and feathered fiends. His first victim was, of course, Mr. Henderson. The baker had the audacity to tell Eddy he was short on bread that day. To Eddy, this was a clear sign. Mr. Henderson, with his prominent nose, was hoarding bread, just like the seagull had hoarded Susan. He had found his calling. He was the Gull Guillotine, and he was open for business. Eddy's reign of terror, if you could call it that, began. He roamed the docks, Old Trusty at the ready. Anyone who even remotely resembled his feathered nemesis was in danger. Old man Fitzwilliam, minding his own business feeding the pigeons, got a hook to the nose for having a particularly prominent beak-like schnoz. Young Timmy Higgins, crying because he dropped his ice cream, was spared when Eddy decided his nose wasn't quite beak-like enough. Yet, each attack was followed by Eddy's chilling catchphrase, delivered with a manic glint in his eye. You took what wasn't yours, Eddy, just like they did. The town was in an uproar. Who was this masked madman? Why was he attacking people with big noses? The local newspaper, the Salty Times, had a field day. Headlines like, Nose Nami terrorizes town and beak beware, the Gull Guillotine strikes again. The mayor, under pressure to do something, organized a town meeting. Little did they know, Eddy was hiding in the rafters, Old Trusty by his side, watching, waiting. When the mayor himself, a man known for his impressive Romanesque nose, took the stage, Eddy knew what he had to do. This was it, the final showdown. The Gull Guillotine versus the Big Nose. Now, you might be wondering about Eddy's sanity. You might be thinking, surely someone must have noticed he's lost his marbles. And you'd be right, sort of. You see, Eddy had a confidant, a sounding board, a tiny feathered Jiminy Cricket to his Pinocchio. He had Captain Pecksworth. Captain Pecksworth was a taxidermied seagull. Eddy had won him in a poker game many years ago. And now Captain Pecksworth was the only one who truly understood him, or so Eddy believed. They're everywhere, Captain, Eddy would rave, shaking his fist at a group of nuns waiting for the bus. They're plotting against us. Captain Pecksworth, being stuffed and all, remained silent. But in Eddy's mind, Those beady glass eyes spoke volumes. They understood. Back at the town meeting, chaos reigned. Eddy, with a mighty cry of "You took what wasn't yours," swung from the rafters on a rope he'd conveniently found. He brandished old Trusty menacingly. The townspeople screamed. The mayor ducked. Eddy, caught in the net meant for the town Christmas pageant, landed with a thud. He looked around at the faces staring down at him. There was fear, confusion, and was that amusement? How dare they laugh at the Gull Guillotine? Didn't they know he was the hero? "You'll all see," he yelled, shaking his fist. "They're everywhere. They're coming for your noses." The townspeople looked at each other. The mayor, dusting himself off, cleared his throat. It was time to end this. The next morning, Eddy woke up in a bright, sunny room. It smelled faintly of disinfectant and clam chowder. He was tucked into a bed with crisp white sheets. Had it all been a bad dream? Suddenly, the door creaked open and a man in a white coat entered. He had a kind face and... was that a beak? No, it was just a large nose. Eddy relaxed. "Ah, Mr. Gullsworth," the man said, smiling. "You gave us quite a fright, but you're safe now. You're at the, seashore sanatorium." Eddy blinked. Sanatorium? But he wasn't crazy. He was the Gull Guillotine. He had to protect the world from... He looked down at his lap. There, nestled in his hands, was a small, carefully crafted figure. It was a tiny seagull, made of yarn, with a single button eye and a beak made of... Was that a toothpick? "Don't worry, Mr. Gullsworth," the doctor said kindly. "We'll take good care of you and your friend." And so Captain Edgar Eddy Gullsworth, the Gull Guillotine, sailed off into the sunset of his own madness. His reign of terror was over. But the legend of the man who mistook noses for beaks lived on. A cautionary tale whispered on the docks. A reminder that even in the calmest seas, madness can lurk beneath the surface.